I never imagined that the most dangerous moment of my life would arrive quietly, disguised as a family celebration. One minute, I was sitting in the same room with my son, believing I was safe. The next, my granddaughter came back to me shaking, whispering words no child should ever have to repeat. In that instant, something inside me broke open. Love turned into doubt. Trust turned into fear. And I realized that if I ignored what I was hearing, I might not live to see the morning. This is the story of the night I chose not to stay silent. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was 62 the winter my son invited me to spend New Year's Eve with his family at a rented house near a frozen lake in northern Michigan. I had lived alone since my husband passed, learning the quiet rhythms of days that no longer belonged to anyone but me. I told myself I had grown comfortable with that silence. Still, when Matthew called and said they wanted me there, that Lily had been asking for me, something softened in my chest before caution could rise. The invitation came during the last week of December, when time feels thin and reflective. Outside my kitchen window, snow pressed against the glass like a held breath. Matthew's voice on the phone sounded warm, practiced in the way grown children speak when they want to reassure. He mentioned the holiday, the fireworks across the lake, the chance to talk calmly about plans for the coming years. I heard what he did not say, too. I heard the unspoken request to be agreeable, present, useful. I packed carefully, folding sweaters the way I always had, placing my medications in their proper container, and slipping a folder of personal documents into my tote bag. Matthew had suggested months earlier that it might be smart to keep everything organized in one place. Retirement statements, insurance papers, notes from my accountant. I told myself it was sensible, even responsible, to bring them along in case the conversation turned practical. The drive north took longer than expected. Snow narrowed the roads and muted the world into white and gray. When I arrived, the house looked like something from a seasonal brochure. Warm lights glowed through wide windows. Pine garlands framed the porch. The lake beyond was solid ice, smooth and pale under the early dusk. It felt staged, deliberate, like a promise someone wanted me to accept without asking too many questions. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and citrus cleaner. Rachel greeted me with a smile that was polite and measured, the kind that never quite reached the eyes. Matthew took my coat, kissed my cheek, and thanked me for coming as if I had done them a favor by accepting. Lily appeared from the hallway and wrapped herself around my waist, her small arms tight and urgent. She had grown taller since I last saw her, but her need for me felt unchanged. As the evening settled, I watched them move through the space together, my son and his wife, coordinated and quiet in their glances. They spoke easily about dinner plans and weather forecasts, about how peaceful it was out here away from the city. I listened, adding comments when expected, noticing how often Lily drifted back to my side. I told myself that families evolved, that there were bound to be moments when a mother felt like a guest in her own child's life. Still, there were small things I could not ignore. A pause before answers. A look exchanged too quickly to be accidental. It was nothing I could name, only a faint tightening in my chest, like the first sign of cold before a storm. That night, as I unpacked in the guest room, I stood for a moment by the window and looked out at the frozen lake. fireworks would light the sky soon enough. A new year would begin, whether I felt ready for it or not. I reminded myself that I was here because I was wanted, because families gathered at the end of the year to hold on to what mattered. Even so, as I placed my documents in the dresser drawer and turned off the lamp, I sensed that this invitation carried more weight than celebration alone. If you are still watching and starting to feel that something about this family gathering is not quite right, comment number 1 below so I know you are with me. Because what seemed like a harmless New Year's invitation is about to take a turn no one could have expected. Now, let's move on to Chapter 2. The evening gathered itself slowly, the way winter nights do, when there is nowhere else to go. By the time dinner plates were cleared and the lights outside the lake began to blink on, the house felt fuller, warmer, almost convincingly alive. Music played softly from a speaker on the mantel. The windows reflected our movements back at us, layered over the snow and ice beyond. I sat on the far end of the couch with a blanket over my knees, watching my son move through the room with the restless energy of someone pretending not to watch the clock. I told myself I was tired, that the heaviness in my limbs was nothing more than a long drive and a long year catching up with me. Even so, I could not shake the sense that I was waiting for something unnamed. The closer midnight crept, the more Matthew checked his phone. Each glance was quick, practiced, as though he had done it many times before without wanting to be seen. When the phone finally rang, the sound cut through the room sharper than it should have. Matthew stood almost immediately. He said it was work, said he would be right back, already halfway toward the hallway before anyone could respond. His voice carried a tightness I had not heard earlier, not irritation exactly, but focus, purpose. I watched him go, then turned my attention back to Lily. She had been sitting on the floor with a puzzle, humming to herself, content in the quiet way children are when they feel safe. A moment later, she rose without a word and followed her father down the hall. I noticed only because the space beside my feet felt suddenly empty. Rachel remained in the room with me. She gathered glasses, straightened pillows, kept herself busy in ways that felt unnecessary. Her movements were careful, almost deliberate. She asked if I was comfortable, if I needed anything, her eyes lingering on me a second longer than before. I told her I was fine. The words sounded thin even to my own ears. Time stretched. The music continued. Outside, a distant firework cracked, premature and lonely. I tried to listen for voices down the hall, but heard only the low hum of the heating system and the faint creak of the house settling into the cold. When Lily returned, she did not go back to her puzzle. She walked straight toward me and stopped so close that her knee pressed against mine. Her face had lost its color. The easy openness I knew so well was gone, replaced by something tight and guarded. She did not cry. She did not speak right away. She simply reached for my sleeve and held on as though the room itself had shifted beneath her feet. I leaned toward her, my instinct immediate and old. She tilted her head closer, her mouth barely moving. What she shared came out in fragments, shaped by fear rather than understanding. She told me she had heard her father say that it would be easier if I went to bed early, that everything would be done before the fireworks started. She said it like she was repeating something dangerous, something not meant for her ears. I did not ask questions then. I did not look across the room. I felt my body grow very still, as though any movement might shatter the moment. I wrapped my arm around Lily and drew her closer, letting her hide against me. From the corner of my eye, I saw Rachel watching us, her expression unreadable. Matthew returned shortly after, slipping back into the room with an easy smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He took his place as though nothing had happened. Conversation resumed. Laughter followed. I nodded when spoken to, answered when necessary, all the while aware of Lily's grip on my arm and the quiet certainty settling in my chest. Something had shifted. The room was the same, but I was not. As the minutes ticked toward midnight, I understood that whatever this night was meant to be, it had already begun to change me. If you are still here and that quiet moment just made your stomach tighten, comment number 2 below. From this point on, nothing that happens will be accidental, and every small detail will start to matter more than it should. Let's continue with Chapter 3. I stayed where I was long after Lily had leaned back against me, her breathing shallow and uneven. From the outside, nothing in the room appeared altered. Music played, glasses clinked softly. My son laughed at something Rachel said, yet the air felt thinner, as if the house itself had shifted on its foundation. I reminded myself to slow down, to not let a child's fear rewrite a lifetime of knowing my own son. Children misunderstand. Adults mishear. I had lived long enough to know how easily worry could turn into invention. Still, I began to watch more closely. Matthew did not look at me the way he usually did. His attention slid past, returned briefly, then moved on. Rachel stayed nearer than before, positioning herself between Lily and me whenever she could, redirecting her with small gestures that seemed harmless on the surface. It was subtle, practiced, the kind of coordination that only appears natural when you are not looking for it. I told them I needed to go upstairs for my medication. The excuse felt ordinary enough to pass without comment. I moved slowly, careful not to draw attention, my body aware of every step in a way it had not been earlier. The hallway felt cooler than the rest of the house. The lights hummed faintly overhead. In the guest bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, listening. Nothing followed me. No footsteps, no voices. I crossed the room and went straight to the wall near the window where the gas detector was mounted. I had checked it earlier that afternoon without thinking twice. Now, I noticed the small green light was dark. I pressed the test button. Nothing happened. My first instinct was to tell myself the batteries had died. It was winter. Cold drained power quickly. But when I traced the cord with my fingers, I found the plug tucked neatly behind the nightstand, switched off, not loose, not disconnected, turned off by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. My hands did not shake yet. That came later. At first, there was only a strange clarity, like a pane of glass sliding into place. I thought of Lily's words. I thought of Matthew offering earlier to check the heating system, of how he had insisted it was better to be safe with the temperatures dropping so low at night. I had thanked him then. I had always thanked him. I moved through the room methodically, as though distance from emotion might protect me. I opened the window just enough to let the cold air spill in. Then I stepped back into the hall and made my way toward the stairs that led down to the utility area near the house entrance. I did not turn on additional lights. I did not rush. The door to the small utility closet was ajar. Inside, the backup generator sat humming quietly, its presence almost comforting if you did not look too closely. The venting pipe angled upward toward the main floor and bedrooms instead of outward. It was not a mistake. It was too deliberate for that. I stood there longer than I should have, my mind reaching for excuses, even as the evidence lined itself up. Matthew had grown up in this house. He knew how these systems worked. He knew what could be blamed on winter, on faulty wiring, on chance. I went back upstairs, my steps measured, my face composed. I had not yet crossed into fear. I was standing at its edge, looking down into something deep and unfamiliar. I understood then that whatever this was, it was not something I could confront openly. Not yet. Back in the guest room, I turned the gas detector back on and watched until the light returned. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hands flat against my knees. The sounds of the house drifted up to me. distant and unchanged. The night was no longer just a celebration waiting to happen. It was a story breaking apart, and I had just seen the first crack. If you are still watching and beginning to realize that this is no longer about suspicion but survival, comment number 3 below. The next chapter reveals how quickly trust can become a weapon when used against the wrong person. Now, let's move on to chapter 4. I returned to the living room with my face arranged into something that could pass for ease. The music was louder now, the minutes slipping closer to midnight, and no one seemed to notice the small recalibration I had made inside myself. I understood that whatever I did next had to look ordinary. Suspicion, if it showed, would only hurry what I was trying to slow. I mentioned feeling tired. I said the drive had taken more out of me than I expected. The words barely left my mouth before Matthew and Rachel echoed their agreement, their concern arriving too quickly, too neatly aligned. They encouraged me to rest, assured me they would handle everything. The speed of their response felt rehearsed, as if they had been waiting for the cue. I nodded and smiled. I thanked them. I told them I would turn in soon. Before I moved away, I caught Lily's eye. I did not speak to her. I did not dare. Instead, I held her gaze a second longer than necessary and gave a small, deliberate shake of my head. Stay here. Do not follow. Her mouth tightened, but she did not argue. She slid closer to the arm of the couch, folding herself into its corner. It was enough. The hallway felt narrower this time, the walls pressing in with a quiet insistence. I kept my steps measured, my breathing even. In the utility area near the entrance, I paused just long enough to take out my phone. The light from the screen was sharp in the dimness. I photographed the generator, the angle of the venting pipe, the switch that controlled its power. I moved quickly, aware that every second mattered. Upstairs, I repeated the process in the guest room, the gas detector, the outlet, the window I had cracked open. I documented what I could without disturbing anything further. Proof mattered. I had learned that lesson long ago, back when numbers and ledgers were my daily language. Evidence survived where explanations did not. I sent the images to myself first, then forwarded them to an address I kept for emergencies, one I rarely used and never shared. When the files disappeared into the quiet certainty of being stored somewhere beyond the walls of this house, I felt a small measure of relief. It was not safety. It was insurance. From the stairs, I could hear Rachel moving through the living room below. Her footsteps followed a pattern now, drifting closer whenever I shifted position. She asked if I needed water, a blanket, anything at all. Each offer landed with the same polished kindness. I declined them all, keeping my voice light, my tone grateful. Time had begun to press. I checked my watch. Midnight was less than half an hour away. Outside, distant fireworks announced themselves too early, bright and careless. I imagined how easily sound could cover other things, how celebration could disguise intention. I closed the guest room door behind me and turned the lock. The click was soft but decisive. I did not sit on the bed. I stood near the door, listening, counting my breaths. Downstairs, laughter rose and fell. Someone turned the music up another notch. I knew then that waiting passively was no longer an option. Whatever Matthew had planned would not pause for doubt or nostalgia. It would move forward, quietly, wrapped in the expectation that I would do what I had always done. Trust, comply, sleep. Instead, I stayed awake, alert to every sound. The hallway outside my door remained empty, but the sense of being watched did not fade. I understood that the careful steps I had taken were only the beginning. The narrow hallway had led me here, and there would be no turning back before the night decided how it would end. If you are still with me, and wondering whether there is any way out before it is too late, comment number 4 below. because from here on, the plan stops hiding and the danger steps into the open. Let's continue to Chapter 5. The room grew heavier before anything else changed. It was subtle at first, a dryness in the back of my throat, a pressure that made me take one breath too many before realizing I had. I stood near the door, listening to the house breathe around me. Downstairs, the music swelled as midnight approached, laughter cresting and falling like waves meant to carry everyone forward into a new year. Up here, time slowed, thickened, pressed close to the skin. I checked my watch. 11:46. Outside, fireworks began to scatter the dark in quick, careless bursts. The sound traveled easily over the frozen lake and into the walls, bright enough to disguise almost anything. I opened the window another inch and let the cold air cut through the room. It stung, but it cleared my head. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were heavier than before, less careful. Each step announced itself. I stayed where I was, my back to the wall, my eyes fixed on the door. The handle did not move right away. There was a pause, just long enough for me to imagine the calculation happening on the other side. When the knock came, it was controlled, measured, the sound of someone still pretending. The second knock carried less patience. The third abandoned it entirely. Wood met knuckles, then palm. The door held. In that moment, the pieces aligned with a clarity that left no room for doubt. The generator humming below. The vent angled upward. The detector switched off by a knowing hand. Lily's small voice, trying to repeat words that did not belong to her. I understood then that this was not a mistake built from desperation alone. It was a plan refined by familiarity, by access, by the assumption that I would comply as I always had. The lights flickered, once, twice, then the room fell into darkness. The sudden absence of sound and sight sharpened everything else. The heating system hummed louder in the quiet. My pulse settled into a steady rhythm, surprisingly calm. Fear arrived fully formed, but it did not overwhelm me. It focused me. I knew that whatever happened next would happen quickly. Darkness made it easier for him. Silence made it cleaner. I stepped away from the door and crossed the room by memory. Keeping one hand on the wall, I retrieved my phone and held it close, its screen dimmed to the lowest setting. There was no signal strength to spare. I did not waste time testing it yet. I needed one thing first: distance. Another impact hit the door, harder this time, the frame shuddering in response. I pictured the hallway beyond it, the narrow stretch of carpet and drywall, the years of family photographs lining the walls downstairs. I wondered briefly how long it would take for someone to notice if I did nothing, how easily a story could be shaped from a cold night in a quiet room. I would not give him that. I moved into the bathroom and locked the door behind me, the click small but final. The window there was smaller, but it opened. I pushed it up and let the night pour in. Snow dusted the sill. My breath fogged the air. I stayed low, steadying myself against the sink, listening to the sounds outside the door shift from insistence to urgency. Midnight arrived without ceremony. Fireworks erupted in full, the sky tearing itself open in color and noise. The pounding on the door faded beneath it, swallowed by celebration. I pressed my forehead against the cool tile and let myself understand the truth fully and without excuse. The plan had revealed itself, and now, so had I. The bathroom was colder than the bedroom, the tile pulling heat from my feet as if it were alive. Darkness pressed in from every side, broken only by the faint glow of my phone screen cupped in my hand. Outside the small window, fireworks continued to burst and scatter, their light flashing briefly across the ceiling before vanishing again. Each explosion reminded me how easily sound could lie, how celebration could cover intent. I focused on my breathing, slow and deliberate, measuring each inhale. The air felt wrong, not thick enough to alarm the body outright, but altered just enough to keep my attention fixed on it. I knew then that waiting would not save me. Endurance would not save me. Silence would only finish what had already begun. This was the moment the night had been moving toward, whether I wanted to admit it or not. I thought of Matthew as a child, his hand fitting easily into mine, the way he used to run ahead and then turn back to make sure I was still there. I thought of how often I had chosen patience over confrontation, harmony over truth. None of that mattered now. The past could not protect me from the present. I lowered myself to the floor and unlocked my phone, my fingers steady despite the weight in my chest. The signal wavered, a thin line that threatened to disappear if I breathed too hard. I did not hesitate. Hesitation had already cost too much. I made the call and kept my voice low, measured, as if calm itself could anchor the connection. I explained where I was, what had been altered, what I believed was happening. I spoke carefully, not because I doubted myself, but because I needed to be believed. Each word felt like crossing a line I could never step back over. On the other side of the door, movement returned, the sound of weight shifting, a hand against wood. The careful pretense was gone now. Whatever remained was urgency, stripped of courtesy. I stayed where I was, my shoulder braced against the wall, my free hand flat against the door as if my body could reinforce it. I thought of Lily then, alone downstairs with people who had already shown me how easily love could be repurposed. I sent a brief message to the only number I trusted beyond the call already in progress, a simple instruction that required no explanation. Stay where you are. Do not come upstairs. It was all I could do from here. Minutes stretched and folded in on themselves. The house creaked and shifted, adjusting to cold and pressure. Fireworks reached their peak and began to fade, leaving behind a hollow quiet that made every sound sharper. I kept my attention on the door, on the rhythm of my breath, on the certainty that this choice, once made, could not be undone. There was a change in the air outside the window, a distant sound that did not belong to the night. It grew steadily louder, cutting through the quiet with purpose. Sirens, not close yet, but real enough to touch. The sounds behind the door stopped. In that sudden stillness, I understood the full cost of what I had done. I had chosen my life. I had chosen Lily. In doing so, I had surrendered the version of my son I had carried with me for decades. The grief of that realization settled deep, heavy, and permanent. The sirens drew nearer, their presence undeniable now. I stayed where I was until I heard voices below, unfamiliar and firm, moving through the house with authority. Only then did I allow myself to rest my head back against the wall and close my eyes. The choice had been made. Whatever came next would unfold in the open, where silence could no longer protect anyone. If you are still watching after that moment and your heart is racing, comment number 6 below. What happens next will show the true cost of choosing to survive, and the consequences will reach far beyond that locked door. Now, let's move on to Chapter 7. The house did not fall silent all at once. Order arrived in stages, layered over the chaos like fresh snow covering broken ground. Heavy footsteps moved through the hallway. Voices I did not recognize spoke with calm authority. A flashlight beam swept across the bathroom door before hands appeared on the handle from the other side. When it opened, the light felt too bright, too sudden, and I had to blink before I could step forward. My legs trembled as I moved out into the hallway. The cold air from the open window followed me, sharp and clean, cutting through the stale heaviness that had settled earlier. Someone guided me toward the stairs, careful, practiced. I registered the details as if from a distance, The scuffed paint on the banister, the faint smell of smoke drifting in from outside, the way the music downstairs had finally stopped. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw my son. Matthew stood between two officers, his hands secured behind him, his shoulders rigid with a tension that no longer bothered to hide itself. His face had drained of color, the confidence I had known replaced by something brittle and exposed. Rachel was nearby, her posture tight, her gaze darting from one uniform to another as if searching for a way to reshape the moment. Neither of them looked at me for long. They did not need to. The truth had already taken its place between us. I did not speak. There was nothing left that words could repair. Lily was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that swallowed her small frame. When she saw me, she moved quickly, crossing the room without hesitation and pressing herself against my side. Her body was stiff, her breathing uneven, but she did not cry. She held on as if letting go might pull the night back into motion. I rested my hand on her back and stayed there, anchoring us both to something solid. The officers moved through the house with methodical care. Doors opened, lights flicked on. Someone stepped outside toward the utility area. I listened as details were spoken aloud, each one confirming what I already knew. The generator, the altered venting, the disabled detector, facts replaced speculation, and with them came a strange, steady calm. An investigator spoke to me quietly, asking for clarification, confirming timelines. I answered without embellishment. I had learned long ago that precision mattered more than emotion when consequences were involved. As we spoke, he paused, his expression shifting in a way that made my stomach tighten. He explained that the airflow from the altered system did not stop at my bedroom. It reached the adjacent rooms as well. Lily's room. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily in my chest. I had known the danger was real. I had not allowed myself to imagine how far it extended. I held Lily closer, my jaw tightening at anger-replaced shock. Whatever hesitation I might have felt about what came next dissolved completely. The decision to leave the house was made quickly. It was not framed as a request. It was a necessity. Coats were retrieved. Shoes were slipped on with the hands that still felt unsteady. Outside, the night was brutally cold, the air sharp and unforgiving. Red and blue lights flashed across the frozen lake, their reflections fractured and restless. As we walked toward the waiting vehicle, I looked back once. The house stood silent now, stripped of warmth and pretense, its windows glowing with borrowed light. It looked smaller from here, less like a refuge, and more like a container for choices that had already been made. The car door closed behind us with a soft, final sound. Lily leaned against me, her head tucked beneath my chin. As we pulled away, the lights faded into the distance, leaving behind a dark stretch of road and the steady hum of tires on ice. I knew then that what had happened would not end with the night. Consequences rarely did. They unfolded slowly, deliberately, reshaping everything they touched. But as the lake disappeared behind us and the road carried us forward, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. We had left alive. Everything else would be faced in time. Morning arrived without ceremony, pale and cautious, as if it were unsure whether it was welcome. We were in a quiet room far from the lake, a place chosen for its anonymity rather than comfort. The heater hummed steadily, and the curtains were drawn just enough to let in a thin wash of winter light. Lily slept beside me, her body finally loose with exhaustion. Watching her breathe was the first moment I allowed myself to stop moving. When the adrenaline faded, it left a hollow ache behind. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts slow but relentless. I replayed the night in fragments, not as a single narrative, but as a series of decisions I had made without looking back. Each one carried weight, Each one had changed the shape of what came next. Later that morning, I spoke with the investigators again. This time there was no rush, no pounding on doors, no sirens pressing urgency into every word. They confirmed receipt of the images and messages I had sent, asked careful questions, and filled in gaps with details I had not yet allowed myself to imagine. The generator, the altered venting, the deliberate shutoff of safety systems, facts settled into place with a permanence that felt heavier than fear. What surprised me most was not the scope of the plan, but how long it had likely been forming. Patterns emerged. Financial pressure that had gone unspoken, decisions hidden behind polite distance and half explanations. I recognized my own role in that silence. The years I had chosen trust over scrutiny because it felt kinder, easier, more maternal. That realization stung more than any accusation could have. By midday, the question of where Lily would stay surfaced naturally, without formality. I did not wait for permission. I did not ask for approval. I stated calmly and clearly that she would be with me, permanently, if necessary. The words felt steady as they left my mouth, anchored by a certainty I had not felt in years. Later, another layer of truth was added. The financial trail led to debts that had no patience for negotiation. Deadlines that aligned too cleanly with the timing of the night we had just survived. I listened as the details were outlined, not with shock, but with a quiet acceptance. It did not excuse anything. It explained nothing I needed to forgive. It simply confirmed that desperation had not acted alone. It had been guided. That afternoon, while Lily slept again, I made calls of my own. I revoked authorizations I had signed too easily. I contacted the attorney who had helped me once before, back when my husband was still alive and caution felt like a shared responsibility. I froze accounts, redirected mail, rebuilt barriers I should never have allowed to erode. Each action felt grounding, a reclaiming rather than a defense. As evening approached, I sat by the window and watched the sky dim. Lily stirred and turned toward me, her face relaxed in a way it had not been since before the lake. I understood then that protecting her would require more than vigilance. It would require presence, consistency, a willingness to be firm when comfort tempted me toward softness. The path ahead was uncertain, marked by hearings, questions, and consequences that would unfold in their own time. I did not pretend otherwise, but as I reached for the lamp and brought light into the room, I felt something settle into place. For the first time since the invitation arrived, the future did not feel like a trap disguised as tradition. It felt difficult, yes, and heavy with responsibility, but it was mine to choose. If you are still here and want to see how everything finally comes together, comment number 8 below. The ending is not loud or dramatic, but it carries a truth that stays long after the story ends. Let's move on to the final chapters. Winter settled deeply by the time the case reached the courtroom. Snow lined the steps outside the building, packed hard by countless feet, indifferent to the reason any of us were there. I arrived early, as I always do when something matters, and sat alone on a wooden bench while the room filled slowly around me. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. It was not a place designed for comfort, only for clarity. I did not bring Lily. That decision had been easy. Whatever the law required of me, she did not need to hear strangers describe what could have happened to her in careful clinical language. She did not need to see her father reduced to a defendant, his name spoken without affection. She stayed with a neighbor she trusted, unaware of the words being weighed in a room she would never enter. When Matthew was brought in, I barely recognized him. The suit he wore did not fit quite right, as if it belonged to someone else. His posture was rigid, his expression set in a way that suggested effort rather than calm. For a brief moment, memory intruded. I saw him at 6 years old, standing in a school hallway with a scraped knee, looking for me in the crowd. I let that image pass without invitation. The proceedings unfolded with a precision that felt almost mechanical. Evidence was introduced without flourish. Photographs of the generator and venting system, records of altered safety devices, financial documents tracing decisions back further than I had realized. Each piece stood on its own, but together they formed a shape that could not be argued away. There were explanations offered, framed carefully around pressure and fear. I listened without interruption. Desperation, I understood. Many people lived with it quietly. What I did not accept was the idea that it erased responsibility. The court did not seem inclined to accept it either. When the verdict was read, it came without drama. The words were clear, measured, final. I felt no surge of relief, no satisfaction. What settled over me instead was a heavy stillness, like the moment after a door closes and the echo fades. Something had ended. Something else would continue, altered but unavoidable. I did not look back as Matthew was led away. There was nothing left to say, and nothing I wanted to remember from that angle. The chapter that connected us, in the way I had once known, was finished, not with shouting or denial, but with a quiet acknowledgement of what could not be undone. The matter of Lily was addressed quickly. There were no objections, no appeals. Custody was confirmed as a matter of course, as though the outcome had been decided long before the paperwork caught up. I accepted it without comment, understanding that stability, once broken, had to be rebuilt without spectacle. When the room emptied, I remained seated for a moment longer. My hands rested in my lap, steady in a way they had not been for weeks. Outside, the day had grown brighter, the snow reflecting light back into the sky. I pulled my coat closer and stood, walking out alone. As I stepped into the cold, I did not feel victorious. I felt finished with uncertainty. The truth had been spoken aloud, recorded, and given its proper weight. That was enough. The rest of my life would not be shaped by this room, but it had been clarified within it. Spring arrived quietly, without asking whether we were ready for it. By then, Lily and I had settled into a rhythm that belonged only to us. My house no longer felt like a place I passed through between obligations. It had become steady ground. Mornings began with simple routines, afternoons with homework at the kitchen table, evenings with shared silence that did not feel empty. In the backyard, we planted a small maple tree where the soil caught the afternoon sun. Lily insisted on digging the hole herself, her hands careful and determined. I held the sapling upright while she packed the dirt around its roots, pressing it down as if she were sealing a promise into the ground. We watered it together, and when we finished, she stood back to inspect our work with solemn satisfaction. Life did not return to what it had been before. I did not expect it to. Some habits stayed with me, not out of fear, but out of awareness. I checked doors before bed. I listened more closely to pauses in conversation. I paid attention to the small signals I had once brushed aside. This vigilance did not feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. One evening, as we sat on the back steps watching the sky darken, Lily asked a question she had been carrying quietly. She wondered whether her parents had ever loved her. I did not rush to answer. I chose my words with care, not to soften the truth, but to keep it from becoming a burden. I told her that love could be real and still fail, that some people lost their way and forgot how to protect what mattered. She accepted this without drama, nodding as if it fit into a space she had already made. After that, she returned to watering the tree more often than necessary, just to be sure it was growing. Some nights, when the house is still, I think back to the moment everything changed. A child returning to a room, shaken but brave enough to speak, a choice made before doubt could erase it. We did not keep the past. We kept each other. That, I have learned, was enough. Some stories do not end with relief or celebration, but with clarity. They leave behind a quieter truth that survival is not only about escaping danger, but about recognizing it in time. What unfolded was not a single moment of courage, but a series of small choices made before silence could take over. Trusting intuition, listening when something felt wrong, refusing to dismiss fear simply because it came from an unexpected place. This story reminds us that betrayal often wears familiar faces, and that danger does not always announce itself loudly. Yet it also shows that strength does not require youth, power, or certainty. Sometimes, strength is simply the decision to act before doubt convinces us to stay still. In the end, what matters is not what was almost lost, but what was protected. Not the past that failed, but the future that was chosen. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your experiences and perspectives matter. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more stories that explore truth, resilience, and the quiet power of choosing differently.